I don't know about you, but burnout has always been something that I've wondered a little bit about. Like, what exactly is it and what are the signs? Today, we're talking with Dr. Hayley Quinn, who's an expert on it. She talks about self-compassion and burnout. She's a coach and a former clinical psychologist who is super smart and the author of the book From Self-Neglect to Self-Compassion. Every time I get to chat with her, I learn so much, and I love how open, authentic, and real she is. When I talk to people who walk the walk, I always notice that the ones who I am actually inspired by are never perfect. They show up fully as themselves. And I don't know about you, but our world is moving so fast. There's so much AI, and I would way rather listen to someone imperfect than a robot or a person who's edited and filtered to perfection. We get into self-compassion, what it is, how to recognize burnout before it's a major problem, and why it's so important to talk to yourself like someone you really love. Let's get started. I'm so glad you're here. You're listening to the Real Talk Podcast, a place for you to come and learn things about the real stuff that you're going through. Not the bright, shiny stuff we see on everyone's feeds, but the gritty, messy parts in the middle that need to be heard to heal. You matter here, and you're not alone. I care about leveling up and helping you do the same. Whatever leveling up means to you, whether that's in business, performance, or parenting. Let's get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're talking to Dr. Hayley Quinn. She's the author of this fabulous book called From Self-Neglect to Self-Compassion. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, hey, we got to get her on to the show because what she talks about is burnout. This is this concept that we hear about over and over and over again. So what I want to talk about today is what it is and how you can prevent it before it starts. Dr. Hayley, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on, Barbie. It's an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. I want to just talk a little bit about you. I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what led you here. I think that you kind of shifted your practice there a little bit a while ago. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I didn't start very educated. I actually dropped out of school early, but I went on, I think I was 32 when I went to university and did a Bachelor of Psychology. Went on to do my postgraduate, became a clinical psychologist and ended up with a PhD. So that probably surprised me more than anybody. And I worked as a psychologist and a supervisor and also training other psychologists for about just over 16 years. A few years prior to stopping being a psychologist, I had other people kind of coming to me for coaching around their practices. What had happened for me in 2016 is I'd had a very significant burnout. I'd been doing university as a single mom. I'd been recovering from a traumatic relationship. And I was literally just going. I was in survival mode and I was not paying attention to myself and what I needed. So I had an awful experience of going through burnout, thankfully recovered, and then really started to think about how do I need to live and work differently so this doesn't happen again. Mm-hmm. And people who knew me and sort of followed me in my work were then coming to me and saying, well, I want to start my own practice or I want to change my way of working so that I don't burn out. Can you help me? And I really enjoyed that work. And I was late identified as autistic with ADHD at age 52. So that helped me understand why I was doing both. I was working as a clinical psychologist, I was supervising and training psychologists, and I was doing this coaching work for psychologists, but also people outside of the profession as well. And I really came to this place of thinking, well, if I'm going to continue to do all of it, it won't be sustainable for me. And given that my work is all about sustainable ways of working and living,
right.
I've got to make
it interesting where you're like, hey, wait a second, maybe I should listen to myself and follow my own advice that I'm giving all my patients probably, right?
Yeah. So it really had got to the point where I was thinking, I'm really enjoying all of it, but I can't keep doing all of it. I need to make a choice. So I made the what was a difficult decision to walk away from a career that had taken me a lot to get to. But I really loved the kind of direction I was moving in. So I gave up my psychology registration and went all in on my coaching, speaking, writing.
Right. And I mean, you can bring all the things that you put into practice, of course, into this field, and obviously helps you so much as a
Yeah.
coach. Now, what are the kinds of things that you can kind of say to the listeners like, hey, these are the things that when burnout starts to creep up, because it's not like you just wake up one day and all of a sudden you're burnt out. These tiny red flags show up. And I know for myself, like you're saying, oh, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. I'll be fine. So what are the kind of things that you will tell your, your patients or your clients of those little red flags to look out for?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's kind of two parts to that as well. And that piece around I'm fine, I'll keep going. That's a really important one to pay attention to, because I'd say that's a red flag in itself.
Yeah,
If
fair enough.
you keep telling yourself, I'm okay, I'll just get through this, you might want to stop and think, well, hang on a minute. If I do keep pushing, what's going to happen?
Right. And why do I feel that way? Why do I feel like I, just have to get through?
Yeah. And, we can go onto the internet and we can search up burnout and we can come up with lists of things to look for. And yes, I'd suggest people do that. But also when you do that, be really mindful that there's many people who read these lists and kind of say, oh, well, no, that's not me. I'm actually feeling okay. I'm doing really well in my work. I've got really good success at my work. I'm just tired. Or I
Right.
just get home and I don't really want to play with the kids, or I don't really want to talk to my partner because I'm a bit exhausted. That in itself is something to look out for. We can go off what the sort of generic information is, but we have to remember that we're individual humans.
Right.
So it's really important to pay attention to what has changed in your own life. What are you perhaps doing more of that isn't very helpful, which might be something like getting home from work and having a glass of wine or an extra glass of wine to wind down, or finding yourself watching more Netflix because you don't want to be paying attention
Right.
to
Or
anything
kind of,
else.
dissociating or turning. And
Yeah,
and I think that it's really important to kind of mention, you and I had talked about this previously, is there is no black or white or right or wrong. For one person, that kind of watching Netflix for a couple hours could be motivating and okay. But when you're using it as kind of a crutch or something to dissociate and tune out, that's where the red flag comes in. Is that kind of right?
absolutely. Because behaviors, when you're kind of going well and life's going well for you and you're not feeling depleted, those kind of things can be totally fine.
Right.
It's when we're using them as coping mechanisms
Mhm.
that perhaps aren't helpful for us
Yeah, and
that
I
we
think
need
that
to pay
that's the
attention.
key. Unhelpful,
Yeah,
because we know too. And I think that we really, especially generally as women, and I'm not saying men aren't like this, but generally as women, I think we know we have a really good inner guidance. And I think that sometimes we just don't want to listen because it's too hard.
absolutely. And I
Mhm,
think a lot of people are quite disconnected from listening to
mhm.
themselves. And I know for me, I didn't want to be in connection with myself for a lot of my life because it felt painful. It felt uncomfortable. So I did a lot of things to kind of stay away from myself. Now, unfortunately, when we disconnect from ourselves because we don't want the pain and suffering that we feel with that, we can end up making decisions that actually create pain and suffering in our lives as well. So for me, it was kind of learning, well, actually, the more I can get to know myself and I can change the relationship with myself to one that's more compassionate, I can start to access the beautiful wisdom that I hold that I
Mhm.
hadn't been listening to. And I can make decisions that are helpful, not harmful for me.
Yeah. And I think though it's the transition time that I think for me was the hardest, because you kind of know where you want to get to, you know where you were, but it's that in between where you don't have those for sure answers that you know that it's going to get to a good spot or how you're going to get there. And you just need to trust yourself.
It can be
It's,
hard, right?
it is. And it's just not having that for sure answer, but being allowed to just to trust ourselves, And I think that, like you said, we are coached and trained a lot to put value so much on, oh, well, I'm fine because I'm making a lot of money, because I'm super productive, because I have a perfect house, and all those kinds of things doesn't mean that you feel fulfilled in life just because it might fulfill someone else.
Absolutely. And I write about this in the book. Like I had met my now husband And, I had this beautiful relationship. I've got a gorgeous adult son who back then was kind of in his teenage years. We had a beautiful house. I had what people would see as a great career as a PhD qualified clinical psychologist. And inside, I was crumbling. I was not telling anybody how much I was struggling, and I was just pushing through. And also, being a psychologist, I held quite a bit of shame around, well, I'm a psychologist, so I should know how to deal with this.
Right. For sure. Right.
But
I should know how.
yeah.
I should.
But at the end of the day, no matter what roles we hold, we are human first. And some things are really hard for us to deal with, particularly on our own. So it wasn't until I kind of started speaking to other people, spoke to my supervisor, reached out to my GP and my therapist, that I was then able to really start to make changes.
So what would you say were the first kinds of changes that you made? So you came to the realization, which obviously was very hard later in life. You'd put in so much time, energy, money into getting these new, degrees, PhD, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I hate this. What would you say was the first kind of sign that you started to put some changes into place?
Yeah. And I didn't hate it. I actually really loved it, which was part of the devastation for me.
Right.
I was so burnt out. I had ignored it for so long. I was so burnt out that I literally had to walk away from my work.
Okay, so this is something really interesting that I want to make sure that we point out to the listeners is you just said you loved it. Mm-hmm. So here's the thing that I think that's very important for us to kind of realize is there can be something that you love doing, but it's still too much for you. It's too much for your nervous system. Just because you love doing something doesn't necessarily mean that you have to keep doing it. That's what we're saying here.
Yeah. And that can be one of the traps, I think, as well. I mean, I work with a lot of people who are high achieving, multi-passionate. And one of the traps can be, I do love it so much. I want to keep doing it. And it's like, I understand that, but we need to look at how can you do it in a way that's sustainable. Because otherwise,
and so that's the thing. You don't have to tell yourself no. You don't have to say you're not doing it at all. You might just need to make some adjustments to make sure that. And also, I think you and I talked about earlier before too, is you can have all the things, just maybe not all at once. Yeah. That's the other thing too. We can have all of the things, but maybe one thing needs to go in a little bit on the back burner. If you're raising young kids or, you're in a new relationship, maybe that has to take a priority right now and something else doesn't, but that doesn't mean it can't come later.
No, absolutely. I think it can be a nice way to think of it, and how I think of it is seasons in life. Mm-hmm. That, a bit like the weather, it changes and your seasons in life are going to change. And for some seasons, things need to step forward, and in some seasons, things need to step back. Mm-hmm. And it's okay to do that. Like, I didn't stop being a high-achieving, multi-passionate woman. Right. I can't imagine I am going to stop being a high-achieving, multi-passionate woman. But when I brought compassion into my life and I changed the relationship that I have with myself, I'm able now to do that in a way that allows me to really enjoy it.
Right. And not feel burnt out.
Yeah.
And we were just talking before we hit record, speaking of seasons, it's really interesting to me. You and I were just saying, as soon as June 1st came, I felt like there was a huge weight lifted off me. And it's not just me. You said that, like, everybody's saying that. I know it's the seasons changing, but I also know there's some weird moon stuff going on. And we need to take advantage of that. Last week, I don't know, I was crying for no reason. I mean, there's a reason, but it felt like no reason. I'm letting go. It's that release. You were saying you were feeling a little bit more tired. You can rest a little bit more when your body needs it. That's not a failure. That doesn't mean that you're not a high achiever. You're allowed to take breaks. That doesn't mean you quit. You take a little break to recharge. And that's what you're saying, is you can have different seasons.
Rest is actually productive. Rest allows us to come back stronger than if we were to just keep pushing through. When we think about that in terms of, you and I have both recognized that prior to the 1st of June, we were feeling a particular way. And after the 1st of June, we're feeling a different way. Now, the only reason we know that is because we are willing to pay attention to ourselves.
Right.
If we were disconnected from ourselves, we probably wouldn't notice that stuff. Or we'd be noticing it in a way that we're perhaps being self-critical. Why am I so emotional? What's going on? Why
Right.
can't I achieve as much as I did? Oh my gosh, what's wrong with me?
What's
Whereas I
wrong
was
with
like, oh, this is curious. I do feel more emotional at the moment. Okay, there's obviously stuff coming up that I want to release. I'm going to allow myself to do that.
Yeah,
It's
and
a
without that judgment and without that trying to stuff it down.
Yeah.
That's the part I think that comes later in life that we realize, like, if you feel anxiety, to be, instead of saying, I need to get rid of this feeling as quickly as possible, how about you just be curious to be like, what is my body trying to tell me? And you just sit with it for a minute. It's quite interesting how that makes that feeling kind of subside, because it just needs to be paid attention to, like a toddler who's having a temper tantrum. Sometimes you just need a hug. Sometimes you just need to be paid attention to. That feeling just needs to be recognized, and then it subsides a little bit.
Yeah. And the beauty of compassion is it allows you to do that. It allows you to do that without the criticism, without the judgment. Because for many, many people, slowing down and being with discomfort is really hard.
Yeah, torture. Yeah.
Yeah. So I
It
think,
was for me when I started, for sure. It literally
absolutely.
felt like torture.
And we can practice that. And when we can bring this compassionate lens, it absolutely makes a difference. I had such a brutal relationship with myself, such a critical relationship with myself throughout my life. And I was really fortunate when I was a psychologist to come across compassion focused therapy and learn from Professor Paul Gilbert, who's the founder of that, and many other wonderful trainers. And then I became a trainer myself, helping other people learn compassion focused therapy. But the beauty of that was it's a very embodied therapy. So as a practitioner, I was really taking that on for myself, and it completely changed me and my life, both personally and professionally.
I'm sure you were like, I'm taking this to help others. Like, it's very interesting with the courses that I'm taking in counseling now too, where it really is so fascinating how you're counseling yourself as you're learning this stuff. I love the word compassion, because it's not about not holding yourself accountable. It's not letting yourself off the hook. It's not being lazy. The word compassion just means you look at it, you hold it, almost is how I feel that word. You allow space for it to be held. And like you said earlier, be curious about what's going on, what's coming up.
Yeah, when we look at the definition of compassion, it's a sensitivity to suffering in ourselves and others, no matter what that suffering might be, whether that's a little bit of suffering or a lot.
Yeah, because it can be different degrees, of course.
Yeah, with a commitment to alleviate or prevent further suffering.
Okay.
So it's, people think it's soft and a bit weak and a bit, it's all about letting yourself off the hook. At the heart of compassion is courage, strength, and wisdom. There's nothing soft and weak about it.
Mm-mm.
It's so powerful. And this is why I'm so passionate about talking about it and writing about it, because it can be really quite misunderstood. And it is such a powerful thing to bring into your life for yourself and for other people.
So if you were going to, you talk to your clients and your patients about having compassion for yourself, where do they start? What would be step one to say, hey, let's look at this and see if you're being compassionate to yourself?
So again, I never like to kind of say this is the way, this is the next step, because it can be different
Everybody's
for different people.
for sure.
But even just kind of noticing how you speak to yourself. Like for a lot of people, when I was a psychologist, I had conversations with a lot of people who would end up so shocked about how critical they were of themselves. They didn't even notice it. It becomes so normal for them, this running critical voice in their head, that they didn't even realize how much it was happening.
I for sure. I definitely was like that, because it's not conscious. You don't say, but all those little tiny thoughts all add up.
So it can be, practicing just slowing down. And again, this stuff can be difficult for people. And I absolutely acknowledge that. And I know it was for me, but just kind of slowing down and checking in with yourself. Like, how am I feeling in this moment? And all these things sound simple, but they're not easy. And they do that's why we say practice, because we do have to keep practicing this. One of the things we can ask ourselves, which is quite commonly used out there, is if you were talking to a dear friend and they were telling you what you're experiencing, what would you say to them? Because
Right.
sometimes we find it easier to think, what would I say to somebody I care about, rather than what would I say to myself?
Sure. Or I like to think of it too, like what would you say to your child? Because a lot of times tell our kids X, Y, and Z. And would I ever talk to my child like that? How I talk to myself sometimes? Absolutely not. To have that compassion and care for other people is a lot easier
Yeah.
than it is for us. And those are the little things that you start to pay attention to make sure we prevent that burnout. So burnout, can you just tell the audience a little bit about what burnout actually is?
Okay, so I mean, there's an official definition of burnout in terms of, the workplace, people feeling a sense of exhaustion and fatigue, a sense of cynicism around their work, a disconnection from work. You might be finding that things feel a lot harder, but we need to understand that burnout doesn't just occur in the workplace. We now know burnout can occur in all sorts of areas. Also, for neurodivergent people, we know that autistic burnout is different to workplace burnout. So it's a complex area, but the sort of things we want to be thinking about is, are things feeling a lot harder than they usually do?
Right.
Are you feeling a lot more exhausted? And we're not just talking about, I got home from work, I'm feeling a bit tired, I had a good sleep.
Some days you're more tired than others.
Yeah. This is that sort of exhaustion that rest alone is not helping. And understanding that there are many factors that can impact how this is actually occurring, and protective factors that are going to be helpful for you after recovery or in burnout prevention. So we want to think about, what is your workplace culture like? Because I work with people in terms of what we can change for ourselves, because that tends to be what we've got control of. It's in no way to minimize the fact that these are systemic problems. These are organizational problems. We can't ignore that there's major change that needs to happen on kind of macro levels, but we don't always have the control of that.
Yeah.
So we need to think about, what's the workplace culture? Is there support within the workplace or within the home or within the organization
Whatever
you're
environment
volunteering?
that we're talking about. Because like you said, you could be burnt out in one area.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe that happens a lot. Like if you're feeling burnt out at home, maybe you use work as an escape, or vice versa. You can feel burnt out in some areas or another. And I think that one of the big things for me that I noticed is that things I used to enjoy before, even if they're small, like you're saying, you just don't enjoy them anymore. You don't feel like doing it. You want to escape and just hide. Isn't necessarily depression, but that burnout where your bones are tired. That's how someone explained it to me before. And I thought, you know what, like that's a kind of good way to kind of describe it, where you feel like you could sleep for 3 weeks and you still would be tired.
Yeah. And if we allow, it's like if burnout gets to the point that it is severe, then depression could also come with that.
Right.
So, there's lots of complexity to it. Thinking about the level of autonomy that you have in the different areas of your life as well. We know that having some level of autonomy is protective against burnout.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. So autonomy meaning what? If somebody fully understand what that means.
So how much control you have around the choices you make, say in your workplace. So if you're completely micromanaged at work, that's going to be a red flag for you.
Right.
Unless you're somebody who likes to be completely micromanaged. So again, we need to understand.
Yeah, you need to pay attention to your signs inside. If that's not something that bothers, if you like to just come and someone tells you exactly what to do and how to do it and you leave and that makes you happy, great, no problem. So it doesn't necessarily mean that that's that. You just need to pay attention to your inner voice. So autonomy, that you have control over different areas in your life. That's what we're saying.
So some of your decision making, some of the choices you can make. For some people, you may have capacity to work a lot of hours and you won't burn out. For some people, the amount of work you're doing could lead you to burnout. For some people, it's about what you're doing. If you haven't got an interest in the work, or the majority of the work you're doing you're not enjoying, that could be something that pushes you towards burnout.
Sure. Yeah, you're not going to enjoy every single minute of your job, but you need to at least find some kind of fire or passion or excitement or enjoyment in something. I mean, most people spend more time at work than they do at home, or vice versa. Like you said,
Yeah.
maybe you do love your job, but you're, burnt out at home and your relationship isn't going as well as you want, or parenting is harder, or all of those things that can cause the burnout as well.
So then we think about my little ADHD brain's just gone off somewhere. I'll just
Oh
see if
gosh, we all have it.
see if it comes back. But this is the lovely thing. If this had happened a few years ago for me, I'd have started getting anxious. I'd be thinking, oh my gosh, I must sound ridiculous. Like, I can't even remember what I was going to say. And now I just have this relationship with myself. I'm like, oh, there you go. You've got ADHD. Of course your brain does that. That's part of having ADHD. It goes off on a little tangent. So I will come back to what I was
That's
saying.
fine. And you know what? It's great because we can just move on to something else. The super important part for me about this podcast is for everybody to listening to know, like, we're real people. There's getting up on YouTube and doing anything online. I always encourage, you got to find your voice. And if we're so worried about being perfect all the time, that's not relatable. I don't want to watch people who are perfect because it's not real. That's not who we are. We got to give ourselves a break. That's,
Absolutely.
I think, a big thing that we talked about too, you and I, is like, this is real life. Like, you can't just expect yourself to be perfect all the time, because you know what that's going to cause? Burnout. So let's just give ourselves a break sometimes.
Absolutely. And, I always say to people, perfection is an illusion of the mind. It does not
doesn't
exist.
exist.
Like, it doesn't exist. We are literally, if you're a perfectionist, you are chasing something that does not exist. And I used to do that. And then you feel bad about yourself, and then you criticize yourself, and it's just not worth it.
Not worth it. I love following people who, online, they're not wearing makeup. Your hair is not perfect. Who cares? One of my favorite things on Instagram is the videos where people empty their purse. And I love seeing that. And one of my favorite ones was like Jennifer Garner. She empties her purse and there's just so much crap in there. And she's got fishy crackers from her kids. And these are these people that are supposedly these perfect stars. And we love seeing that. And that, I think, is really important too, to remember in your life, to surround yourself with people who don't expect you to be perfect. Because if your first problem is if you're holding yourself to these ridiculously high standards. And second of all, if you're surrounding yourself with people who expect you never to screw up or expect you to always be perfect, maybe you should reconsider those circles that you're in, because it's not going to be good for your health. There's no chance.
Yeah. So that speaks to that sort of, what support do you have inside your kind of context of where you're feeling burnt out, and also outside of that. But also, and I'll use the example of work, is how much of your identity is tied to your work, because that's a tricky one as well, because that is a role you choose. That's something you do to make money, to support your life. And if all your identity is caught up in your work, that can be really tricky. And that was hard for me, because I had spent a lot of time as a single mom working really hard to get my degree as a psychologist. There's a lot of hoops you have to jump through to be a psychologist. And I was like, I'm a psychologist. Right. And then all of a sudden it was like, I don't know if I'm even able to work anymore. So that was another layer for me of like, oh my gosh, well, who am I if I'm not that? Yeah. So that was something that I did a lot of work around my identity, so that I wasn't tied, and I'm not tied to what I do for work now.
I think that's important too for people who are, I see it a lot. My kids being now kind of in that graduating, moving on to university. So maybe not necessarily even your work, but people who identify so strongly, you're a mom. Okay, well, you're always going to be a mom. But what happens when that moves anything that you wrap your identity up, whether it's a job, whether it's a relationship, whether it's, the mom job, that can all go away. And then what's left?
Absolutely. So, I actually have a blog on my website about compassion and parenting an emerging adult. So that could be a nice one for your listeners, because I wrote that when I was going through the experience of my son transitioning into adulthood. And it is absolutely, it's all these times, if we are so tied to a particular identity, that's really fragile. Really fragile.
It is, because it can be taken away.
Absolutely.
And that did happen to me too. I was running dance competitions with my mom and my sister, and I loved doing it. I loved it. My identity, similar to you, was totally wrapped up in that.
Yeah.
And then COVID happened and we had to close down the company and okay, well, who am I now?
Yeah.
And I think that now working through all that is for the listeners is to be, you are you,
Yeah.
regardless of what you do, what your job is, who you're married to, who your kids are. You are you matter. You're very, your voice matters, your thoughts matter, your feelings matter, and you're a psychologist and you're a podcaster and you're these. That's a really important thing to have that compassion for and to figure out. And I think the step one is to kind of have enough compassion for yourself to say, hey, I'm important enough to sit down and even figure out what I want out of life. Because a lot of the times we do so much for everybody else, you don't even take 5 seconds to even think about, hey, what do I want? Never mind, how am I going to get it?
Absolutely. And again, I talk about this in the book about, the dreams you perhaps have set aside and what are your dreams and what do you want for yourself? And there's lots of reflective questions in the book as well that help people go through that, and some really beautiful guided meditations as well that support people through the process of the book. But also in terms of the sort of burnout prevention piece is, what do you have outside of your main role, whether it's work, whether it's caretaking? We want to make sure we have other things that we are enjoying and focusing on that aren't just this one thing.
It is. And that's really interesting because when I had young kids, you go to therapy, first question, oh, what do you do for hobbies? I don't know. Because I didn't have time. I didn't even think about what do I like to do. And, coming back to your book, I really encourage everybody to read the book that Dr. Hayley Quinn has written, because it really is a guide more than even a book. There's journal prompts, there's meditations, there's so much information here that is so valuable, that you have really taken all your life experiences, your real, tangible, there's no fluff. It is really, really valuable tools here. And I can see that you put in so much work to kind of think about how to teach people, like from the beginning. It really does show you like how to even figure out what you want out of life. A lot of times I think that growing up and you take yourself, for example, you went through, get the degrees, you get all the things, and you're like, this is not working out for me now. What? How are you going to figure that out? And I really love the book for that.
Oh, thank you. That was really important to me, because I think, we can read books that give us lots of information and then put them down and go, okay, that's great. And now what?
Well, and that's great for them.
Yeah.
I read something before about like self-help books, and a lot of times that's us avoiding our own problems because we feel like we're doing something about them because we're reading all these books, but we're not actually doing something for ourselves. And they're great. Self-help books are great. I love them. I love reading about, but that's how the other person solved their problem. And your book really does a good job of teaching how to solve your own issues, your own learning for self-compassion. And that's what I really love about the book. Thank you.
That means the world to me, because that's really what I wanted it to be.
Yeah. And I really, it's almost like a workbook, and I really do love that. So everybody listening, I really want you, the link will be in the show notes. This is probably thousands of dollars worth of therapy right tied up in this book. And you really can learn and really reflect on what you want out of life. The theme of this episode was burnout prevention, but I think that we talked about so much more here, and we're just getting started. So where you're going to find more information about how to take care of yourself, to really listen to what you're feeling in your life, is in Dr. Hayley's book. So like I said, I'm going to link to it. We're going to link to everything about her. You also see people one-on-one, obviously, for coaching. So tell me a little bit about that. So if one of our listeners is wanting to kind of talk to you, how would they find you?
Yes, so then go to my website, drhayleydquinn.com, and I do one-on-one coaching for either business owners, or if you're in corporate, or also for life. So whether it's work-related or life-related, because as far as I'm concerned, it's all connected.
Of course, yeah. I mean, business, personal is business. I mean, we can't joke ourselves that everything isn't connected in life. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do the one-on-one coaching. I have a compassion community that's just opened as well. It's like a monthly gathering online, but I also then send weekly prompts to help people kind of stay focused on taking care of themselves between the gathering sessions. And I occasionally run a group coaching program as well. So I've got a wait list.
That can be really helpful for people to kind of have that group approach. And I do like the monthly kind of check-ins, like you're saying, because I think a lot of time of what we do is we say, oh, things are going great. And that's when we need to kind of make sure we're keeping up on that maintenance. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. I will link to everything in the show notes. Make sure you guys check out Dr. Hayley. I've really enjoyed having you. This is so great to be talking about these topics. I want to make sure that we talk about this stuff. There isn't any shame. If you need help, make sure you reach out. Reach out before it becomes a big issue. Reach out to people who have been through it, like Dr. Hayley. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, and I hope that your listeners find some little nuggets of gold in this.
Thank you for listening to the Real Talk podcast with Barbie. This is the place for you to come and learn things about the real stuff that we're all going through. Make sure you check out the show notes, links to social media, and information on any guests that we had on the show. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so glad you came.